April elections. They may not seem sexy, but they certainly can be important. Tonight, we are making sense of what voters accepted and rejected on both sides of the river, from Ferguson to Springfield to Webster Groves and the Rockwood School District. Plus, updates on big stories with hashtags like NFL, NGA, and Northside. So stay tuned.
And on Stay Tuned, you drive the discussion. We bring local experts, journalists, and civic leaders together to have tough conversations for a stronger St. Louis. Tweet us your insights on tonight's topic, and you've got a seat at the table. With a few national experts and a panel of community members, this is the show bringing more light and less heat to the issues that matter. So stay tuned.
Don't let their young looks fool you. They are wise and well-versed in the world of politics in and around the St. Louis region. Welcome to the table. Nick Pister, reporter for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and Jason Rosenbaum, reporter for St. Louis Public Radio. Okay, guys, we're going to hear from the newly elected Ferguson City Council members a little later in the show, but maybe you could start us with a little context before we hear from them about their campaigns and their victories. Let's just start as simple as possible. Did anyone backed by the protest movement win a seat in Ferguson?
No. I mean, it was pretty much, everyone thought that would be, everyone was looking to see what would happen with that and thinking that there would be this wave of support from the protesters that would put in one of the people from their movement. And what we ended up seeing was we did see the racial makeup of the Ferguson Council change, but you don't see that real dyed-in-the-wool protest movement now represented within the Ferguson City Council, which is what a lot of people had hoped for. And I think one thing that at least stood out to me, and it is that what a lot of people didn't realize during the days of the unrest around Ferguson is many of the protesters are not from Ferguson. They don't live there. Therefore, they can't actually vote and take part in these elections. It was a microcosm of a lot of people from the areas surrounding it. Not to say that none of the protesters actually live in Ferguson, but it is a movement much larger than that. But you have a town of 20,000 people, and for them to have a real impact in the election would have taken a lot more. And it seems like a lot of the old guard still, or people who are kind of more mainstream, accepting of things, with some of the previous administration, were able to carry the day and win.
Well, Ella Jones had some support among the activist movement, but I wouldn't say she had the organized groups behind her. But, you know, the Wesley Bell and Bob Hudgens were clearly opposed by quote-unquote protest-aligned groups, especially outside groups from
Brian Fletcher, I think you meant. You said Bob Hudgens.
Yeah. Oh, I meant Brian Fletcher. Bob Hudgens actually
and
lost.
Maybe we should, and before we go forward, we should break it down. Wesley Bell,
yes.
And much was made of race, as you said. So Wesley Bell, African-American, Brian Fletcher, former mayor, Caucasian, and then Ms. Jones, African-American.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, given the amount of attention that was placed on Ferguson for being a two-thirds African-American city, yet not having a lot of African-American representation in government, I do think that's significant in more than just a symbolic sense, because racial diversity in politics has been a long-standing issue in the state of Missouri, and it was kind of magnified by Ferguson. But Nick's right. I mean, as far as, you know, getting somebody who's a quote-unquote protest-aligned candidate on the city council, I mean, I don't think that they were terribly successful. And even Ella Jones, who some in the movement supported out of a four-candidate race, I mean, the reason why she won more likely is, number one, she started campaigning earlier. Number two, she was actually supported by many of the old guard within the local Democratic Party. And number three, she's a Mary Kay representative, which gives her the personal skills that I think are needed in local politics like that. I hope I got the company name, Mary Kay.
I think so.
She's used to going door to door.
I've already gotten one name wrong, so I wanted to make sure.
That's okay. Let's go back to Wesley Bell for just a little bit. They put a he's currently a municipal judge in another municipality. When that's a hot topic to say the least. Now they have that on the Ferguson City Council. How does he square that?
Well, he's indicating that there were problems that need to be fixed, and that he was advocating, for changes, and that he wasn't a contributing factor to the problems with the municipal judges. But at the same time, I was at his election night party. The mayor of Ferguson, who's been in the news all these months since the unrest, he showed up there. So I mean, clearly, Wesley Bell, but he also had Antonio French, who was at his election night victory, but it was after he had won. So everybody's sort of going to the victor. But it was not, he's not the type of person that a lot of the protesters wanted. And while the racial makeup has changed, it may not produce the results in the long run of what they need.
Yeah, and I think Wesley Bell's response, and I know that he's going to be on the show later, is, he told me this almost verbatim, just because there are some bad municipal judges doesn't mean all municipal judges are bad. And it'll remain to be seen whether he ends up keeping the position in Valda City as a municipal judge and prosecutor in Riverview. But I do want to touch on something Nick said that hasn't been talked about a lot. I do think that this election signified an indirect victory for Mayor James Knowles III, who's been heavily criticized throughout this situation. And while I don't know if the three councilmen are going to be quote unquote allies of his, I don't think they're going to be like antagonists either. And I think it really has to draw into question about whether there's enough support to recall him from office or even gather enough signatures, which is going to be a tough process. I mean, he's already kind of broken the mold by being a Republican elected in the heavily Democratic North County. And I mean, he's a nonpartisan office, but if he's already broken that barrier, this may be another challenge he has to go forward, but clearly the election doesn't really bode well for the recall efforts.
No, I think the recall this clearly shows it's going to be very tough for them to get anything to happen there. And it shows that he is able to put together some type of coalition that may keep him in power. They're going to have big decisions. They're going to be talking about what happens with their police department, about a lot of things going on forward.
About how they're going to pay for stuff. They're millions of dollars in the hole, are they not?
Right, or who they're going to hire to be the new city manager. A lot of this comes down to who's the city manager, not who's the mayor, or not who's on the city council. Yeah. They're going to make that decision. And so these are the people who are going to be there. And it seems like he has at least some tacit coalition behind him that will support his initiatives. Because these were not the bomb throwers, the people who are really going to come in and break everything apart and change everything. This is almost like these people are going to be a lot more thoughtful as listening to what he has to say. And
one of the things that I think was lost in the election is no matter which candidate you were following, whether it was someone like Brian Fletcher on one end of the spectrum or someone like Bob Hudgens on the protester spectrum, none of the candidates supported disbanding the Ferguson Police Department and contracting with St. Louis County for different reasons. But that had been such a national, I don't want to say obsession, but fixation after the grand jury decision, almost like it was going to be a fait accompli. And it's very unlikely the Justice Department can just dissolve the department by fiat. They can obviously sue Ferguson and make it way too expensive, and maybe they change their mind later, but it doesn't really look like, if the decision has to be done by the governmental entity, that there's really any support on that council to do something like that. So I think that was missed.
What about the DOJ recommendations that are on paper? How do they enforce those, and can the city afford to do what they've asked them to do?
They'll probably enforce them through a consent decree, which I don't want to say is inevitable, but I think is highly possible.
They said, they've already done some of them. Body cameras on police, things like that. So some of those things they were working out long before this ever happened. But it's going to be there are a lot of decisions, and as we've seen even in recent months, the tenor and pitch is still there in Ferguson. Things can still happen. Protests still show up there every once in a while. We just saw, not that long ago, where a couple of police officers were shot there during some of the protests. So it can boil up, and there are these flashpoints if something happens, or that's the epicenter of where people go. And so we could still see that stuff boil over in the months or even years to come. And that's why what happens with the city council is important. Yeah.
Let's take a break and hear from the council members, council member-elect that we are talking about right now. We caught up with them earlier today at the Florissant Valley Community College, where they took some questions from our team and from some students who were there as well.
We have a lot on our plate. We've had recent resignations of the city manager, the police chief, municipal judge. We've had some terminations and other retirements, so we have a lot of positions to fill. We also are dealing with the $2 million shortfall. These last 8 months have been tough on the city financially. We've had overtime of police officers. We've had reduction in traffic violations. And our sales tax have been greatly reduced by the fact that people in the public have shied away from shopping in Ferguson for the last several months. So one of the first things that Wesley and Elle and myself are going to have to deal with is the replacement of these individuals, but also go right into budget negotiations.
Now the real work begins. So, you're working hard to win the election, but once you win, it's great. You're happy. You're jumping up and down. But then the enormity of it kind of hits you in the face that, hey, we got a lot of work to do. So I think that's kind of settling in now and trying to get up to speed so that, and I think they would agree, that we want to be the best council persons we can be.
My background is basically working with people. It's about the people, and when I decided to run a couple of years ago, it's really to serve the people. And my passion is really with the senior citizens now, so just want to work, give back, to the community. I've been in the community 36 years. The community has been great to me and my family. So I'm at a point in my life that I want to be of service and give back to my community.
Our motto in Ferguson is community of choice. So we all love Ferguson. We want to present a picture of Ferguson that we see. Much of what's been presented over the last 8 months has been a negative image of Ferguson. But there's a lot of wonderful things that are here in Ferguson. We have an award-winning farmers market. We have a brand new community center. We only have but the best to look forward to. We've been through some tough months, but I believe we've turned the corner. And with last Tuesday's elections, I think it's a new beginning for Ferguson.
We live in a new normal, a new face of Ferguson. The people here, they want their community. We're not going to see that flight. People are planning on staying here, working together. It becomes important to the residents that we work together and we find a solution to our own problems. There's no way you can be on the outside and try to bring a solution on the inside. If you're going to want things to change, you must be on the inside. And it's going to take the residents of Ferguson to change.
People who live here have been dealing with this every day. And so it gets to the point where we do want to get back to that normal, that new normal, as we've talked about before. And I think that so for someone on the outside, it's easy to glorify and romanticize what happened, come in, and then go home. But for someone who lives here and has to deal with everything that's going on, be it the protests and things of that nature, it's a different dynamic for those of us who live here, because I think anyone can see that change is in the making. I think many of us are saying, hey, let's give us an opportunity to do it. Because it's already happening. So give us an opportunity to show what that change can look like.
Well, I think that's where, if anything, the city of Ferguson has failed on is not hearing the cry, the underlying simmering tension that was in the community. Why did it explode in Ferguson? There's been shootings in other communities, but not the explosion of the unrest that we've seen in Ferguson.
Well, if we're going to continue to grow, not only communication, however, the residents got to be educated also.
I've been a big proponent of community-oriented policing, changing the culture of the police department to where it is more a part of the police department is more a part of the community, and then also court reform. And as a municipal court judge, that's one thing that I've been pushing for years, long before August. And you can see some of the fruits of that with the uniform fine schedule that came out that all 82 municipalities agreed to. And there's some other things on the work, so it's just getting started. So not just with Ferguson, but regionally, there's a lot of things that we're looking to do to change.
I would like to get to know the officers, and I want the officers to begin to know me. And I'll be visiting them on a regular basis, simply because we've got to build a relationship. If there's no relationship built, then everyone is going to continually disrespect each other. But if if the police department see that the city council is really interested in them and how they police, then they will police different. On the other hand, if the citizens realize that the city council is in their own shift change, they want to know what they have encountered, then the citizens are going to change also. It's the leadership that brings the change, because if you're going to lead people, you set example, 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 and people will follow good leadership. I think the key is listening. Everyone has a point of view, and you don't have to always give them an answer. Some people just want you to listen to them, from the young people to the seniors. While I was campaigning, I engaged with a 65-year-old African-American man, then a 65-year-old Caucasian man. Both of them saying the same identical thing. And I've said this repeatedly. We've got to not only listen to them, but somehow bring people together.
None of us are the gatekeepers for justice. You know, we all have our point of views, and we all have our lanes that we can contribute to the community in. But some people, it may be peacefully protesting on the street. But some of us, it may be working from the inside. Some of us, it may be these one-on-one conversations, and we all have to respect those different angles and lanes that we all have.
One more thought on Ferguson. I believe 30% turnout versus, I think, 16 in the county-wide for an April election. Is that, should we be impressed with 30%?
I was not, and it was significantly more than what Ferguson had seen in previous years. But after all of what we saw in August and in November, of tear gas going off in the streets every night, of protesters out there, 30% of the people show up. I mean, you would think it would be much higher after all the stuff that went on there.
And the only other closing thought I have about turnout is, I think it was high for a municipal election, and as we mentioned before, the protest, quote-unquote protest candidates didn't end up winning, but I think there may be some hope for them in the future. The aforementioned Bob Hudgens did get almost as many votes as two candidates combined in a previous election. He could potentially run next year. And there were other factors that probably made their runs very difficult. Fletcher's name recognition and Bell's pretty high-end campaign team. So we'll have to see whether that turnout can come out next year as well.
Let's skip across the river for just a second to East St. Louis. Amika Jackson Hicks is now the mayor of East St. Louis. Upsetting, I guess you would have said, at least before all the kerfuffle that happened with the ballot. The former mayor, Alvin Parks. What's going on there? Can a mayor make a difference in a city that I think that the troubles are well documented?
It's tough. East St. Louis, I've been there, I've covered many things there, and you do sit back sometimes and wonder, how could somebody take control of this? How could you improve the many challenges that face East St. Louis? Alvin Parks has been mayor for 2 terms. He comes from a political family that's been there for a long time. So does Miss Jackson Hicks. Her relatives, Eddie Jackson, who's a state representative there. I don't think much is going to change based on who's the mayor in the past. We've seen East St. Louis has gone through a number of mayors. Carl Officer was mayor for there a long time and had many scandals. I think Alvin was able to avoid any of the major problems that some East St. Louis mayors have had, although he did run into some trouble with a son of East St. Louis, Dick Durbin, who's a high-profile senator now, and it's very rare you see a U.S. senator actually get involved in a municipal election, and he did.
I was going to just say, I mean, Dick Durbin, from what I recall, has refused to ever get involved in Springfield politics, especially when Rod Blagojevich was reaping havoc and making everybody mad. I did find it kind of interesting that he did get involved in that race, and he's very concerned about the nightclubs being open, which doesn't seem to be something that a U.S. senator, especially one with that much high up ranking, would do. But he's from East St. Louis, so I think there's a real personal connection there.
It is very personal, but when you see somebody who's so powerful in the corridors of Washington come back, and I've seen him on the streets of East St. Louis, he was really it was a personal issue about the hours of how long these clubs were staying open, and he wanted that stopped. And Alvin would not do that. The club revenue is a significant part of the East St. Louis system. It's almost the only thing you have left other than the churches. And they're going to try to keep that together as long as they can. And so, other than that and the Casino Queen. So I don't know, but it is very interesting that you see a senator come down and do that.
And the incumbent Parks had to run as a write-in because he didn't get the required number of signatures to get on the ballot.
I think he would have won if he were on the ballot. Alvin has done well in all of his previous elections. He still actually got quite a few write-in votes. It's very hard to get any significant amount of write-in votes anywhere, and he did fairly well. So
let's switch back to this side of the river to St. Louis City Hall. We have on the next segment we have three young, we're calling them, and they certainly are, but young aldermen for the St. Louis Board of Aldermen, and two elected for the first time. Anything going on in City Hall that we should make of this youth movement?
Well, I think we have seen young candidates there before, young people elected. One of the challenges at City Hall, I think you have 28 aldermen, so it's still a minority on the board, but it's also that learning curve and figuring out how to get any of the issues that are more important to younger people done at City Hall, and you still have an older constituency in some of these different wards. It is interesting, though, to see that, we have the new alderman, Jack Coder, who's going to be here, who represents downtown. So these are high-profile wards, too. These are important, things that get a lot of attention. I'm looking forward to seeing how it's going to play out with a lot of these issues in the future.
I do think that I think it was mentioned before that there is a pretty grand tradition in St. Louis politics of youthful people entering. I think Mayor Slay entered the political arena either in his early 30s or late 20s, and Vince Shamel the same way. And there has been, on other levels in St. Louis governments, kind of a mini youth movement. Joshua Peters, a state representative who represents part of the north side, I think was about 25 when he was elected. Michael Butler, also, who represents kind of a central corridor north side ward, is in his late 20s as well. And there are other people on the Board of Aldermen who range from their late 20s to mid 30s. So I think that especially with this idea that the city needs an infusion of young people to basically sustain itself.
To keep it alive.
To keep it alive. I think it's only inevitable that youthful individuals are going to start being in the palace of power, so to speak.
One interesting thing, though, is the mayor's staff. He's seen significant turnover in his staff in recent months, but a lot of the older guard people that were with him are no longer there, and he's replaced. I mean, many people on his staff are all under the age of 40.
Yeah.
The city councilor is under the age of 35, I believe.
Mary Ellen Ponder.
Mary Ellen Ponder, who's his chief of staff, who's replaced Jeff Rainford, is 34, I believe, and so Patrick Brown, I don't even know if he's 30.
Well, the state auditor now is 32, or is going to be 32, so I guess it's a part of a statewide movement, but yeah.
Yeah, well, Missouri's getting ahead of that.
And our reporters are young, too. So thank you both for being here. Stick around at the end of the show. We've got a little mishmash we want to include you on as well, and we would like to include what you have to say with hashtag Stay Tuned STL. Let's see what you might be saying already. Thank you very much. Thank you, guys. About them, let's talk with them. Two newly elected and one second-term elected Board of Aldermen. Jack Coder, St. Louis Board of Aldermen from the 7th Ward. That's correct. Kara Spencer from the 20th Ward, and Scott Ogilvie, just re-elected for his second term of the 24th Ward.
Hey, Casey.
Can I just set something straight for the record here? Is it Alderman Kara Spencer or Alderwoman?
I'll go by both.
That did not set it straight for the record.
Well, okay, for the record, I would prefer alderman.
Okay, and that, because that's the traditional name, I believe, is that right? Okay, all right. Well, we'll come back to that. What I asked the two reporters who follow you guys, let me ask you, what does your election signal? Alderman Spencer?
Well, for me, I think what's significant about the race in the 20th Ward, I ran a pretty grassroots campaign. I don't have any political background. In fact, my background is in mathematics, a completely seemingly unrelated field, although there's a lot of overlap. I did strategic market modeling. But I don't have a political background, so as a single mom, as a real resident, just a community member, I think it signals a voice of just a regular person, really. And I'm really proud of that. In the 20th Ward, we've also had historically really low voter turnout. And with this last primary, we were able to turn out almost 50% more over the last primary. And then again, in the general, we turned out even more people. So we've really energized a ward that has been somewhat forgotten in some ways. We have a tremendous amount of crime and other problems down there, so it signifies a new beginning.
Remind us the 20th Ward, kind of the general boundaries.
So we're also sort of unique in that we have somewhat definable boundaries in that we are Cherokee Street on the north side going down, Chippewa runs down the middle of it, down to about Merrimack, with Grand and Jefferson Broadway being the eastern border.
Am I making too much? Are we making too much of the fact that you're young and exuberant, or is there some? What does your election signify?
Casey, we had a slightly different situation in the 7th Ward, where the incumbent of 29 years, on her own accord, retired. Mm-hmm. She had decided
Phyllis
that
Young.
Phyllis retired and decided it was time to hand the reins to the younger generation. And in my race, we had 3 young candidates. I, in fact, was the oldest candidate, 29 years old. So the voters had 3 options, all young, all very energetic, and I think that's what it's going to take to represent the 7th Ward, which is a very big, diverse ward with a lot of great historic neighborhoods and a big business community downtown. So,
Scott, what do you know now that you didn't know when you were in their position about how city government works or does not?
Everything, Casey. What I know now, I mean, I know who to call, who can actually deliver a result when you need something done. I also kind of know the day-to-day frustrations that you face. I always view St. Louis as this place with sort of unlimited potential, but you're always frustrated by some of the slow progress. And you also learn that you need a ton of patience to see sort of public works projects through. There's no shortage of good ideas on things we can do, but there's a real sort of a nightmare of different agencies you have to go through in order to implement something that may seem very, very straightforward at first. So you got to be...
And a lot of aldermen, too.
You got to be patient. For now, we're losing half of them in a few years, but yes, it's still 28.
Are you feeling any of that frustration yourselves already?
I can say for me personally, I've had the benefit of a month to sort of start to understand how city government works. I had a very competitive primary race and was fortunate to run unopposed in the general. So I spent the last month sort of going to meet with various department heads and trying to figure out how government actually works, who you got to call when you need to get a problem fixed. But it's a big system. It's a lot bigger than I even realized before I got into this. There's a lot of layers of bureaucracy to get through.
If someone looks at 3 fashionable young people, they might think, okay, great, your priorities are food trucks and bike lanes. Not that there's anything wrong with either of those, but whether it's as bad as the perception, we have a crime problem in this town. Where does that fall on your list of priorities? I'll open it up to all 3 of you.
I mean, I'll be honest, it's one of my top priorities, absolutely. We have a huge crime issue in the 20th Ward. Crime is increasing at staggering rates, whereas citywide, our crime rates have been pretty steady. I think that's something that our city should be proud of. But when we see burglaries up by 50% in some of our neighborhoods and person crimes up significantly as well, we really have a lot of work cut out for us. In the 20th Ward, we have a lot of vacant houses. They really contribute to activities that lend themselves to crime, and so we're going to start tackling crime right off the bat. We really also have, we just came through a wave of hotspot policing in the 20th Ward, which sets some members of the community, we have some issues of trust with our police department, which we really need to work through together. And I think having some really positive interactions is going to set us on the right path for that.
Downtown has not been immune by any means.
No, by no means. I mean, public safety was the dominant issue in the 7th Ward campaign, and my phone, every time it rings, it seems to be an issue relating to public safety to this day. I'm encouraged by some of the steps the police department's taken, some new leadership downtown with the opening of the real-time crime center, which I had an opportunity to tour today. The city's finally going to get into, I guess, some modern policing tactics where you can start linking private cameras and public cameras to keep a better eye on what's happening, particularly downtown. Because in the end of last year, I mean, we saw a big spike in robberies in downtown and downtown west and in the historic neighborhoods just south of downtown. Makes some sense because that's where the most people walking around, going to restaurants, hanging out late at night are. But we can't have that. If people don't feel safe downtown, that's a big problem, not just for the 7th Ward, but for the whole city and region.
Optimistic, skeptical of some of the things we're trying.
Well,
police
I mean,
department's
the
trying to do?
24th Ward, luckily, has done very well. Crime is really substantially down across the board over the last 5 years. Nonetheless, I think it is, it's the perennial top issue in the St. Louis region. And there's really no silver bullet way to fix this. I mean, we have generational concentrated poverty and tremendous vacancy, tremendous lack of opportunity, tremendous lack of continuity within the school system for a lot of young people. And you need to tackle crime. I think a real-time intelligence center, we might catch some people sooner, but the real way to fix crime is to start much earlier, and that's going to take a generation of effort to really make progress.
Yet more people may be talking about the NFL. Do you guys support a vote of the people to decide whether or not we, in the mayor's words, extend revenue that's already coming in? He doesn't consider it new revenue, new taxes. Do you support, should the people vote on that? And regardless of that, you guys will have a vote on it, it sounds like. Would you vote for it? Should we be putting money in that direction?
Well, I'll just say, right now we don't know what we'd be voting for. There's been absolutely zero communication between anybody advocating for a new stadium and the Board of Aldermen itself, at least that I'm aware of. So I would have no idea what I would be voting on right now. I will say that it's a city ordinance that not just new taxes, but any financial assistance to a professional sports facility needs a vote, needs voter approval. That's been a city ordinance since 2002. It was put on the ballot by an initiative of citizens, and citizens approved it. So that's the city ordinance. I think there's no reason we shouldn't follow that ordinance. It's the will of the voters. If it's a great package, voters may very well support it. But I think it's a very, certain people have got off on the wrong foot. The Dome Authority is sort of suing to invalidate that ordinance. I think that's really an embarrassing, terrible approach for a public agency to take.
Thoughts? Is it unfair to ask you how you would vote having not been in office yet?
I agree wholeheartedly with Scott on this. I think we should put it to the vote of the people, absolutely.
Well, Scott's exactly right. We don't know what we're voting for at this point, so I couldn't say one way or the other how I'll vote. But what I will say is I support following the law. So if the courts uphold this ordinance and it requires a public vote, we should have a public vote. If the courts throw out the ordinance and there's some other way to finance this stadium, I'll support that. I'm a big proponent of the stadium, of revitalizing the riverfront, and most importantly, of getting the Rams out of the Edward Jones Dome and the Americas Center. Because the Americas Center needs a lot of work. There's a lot of improvements that need to be done to that facility. That's a place that can generate a lot of money for the city and for the region and put heads in beds and put people in the restaurants. And so if we can get the Rams and maybe a soccer team or a new football team and a new riverfront stadium and get more convention business, I think it's a win-win.
It's a different animal you're talking about now because you're talking about more convention business in that building. But I think a lot of people would argue that you promised all those things 20 years ago, too. I think I just asked you a non-question, made more of a statement, only to close out the segment. So I reserve the right for you to revisit that issue after we check in with Jim Kircher, who checked in with Illinois Public Radio's Amanda Vinicky to talk more about our neighbors to the east.
So Amanda Vinicky is joining us from the State House, the press office down there. I think of all of this stuff that goes on in the legislature, Amanda, that divides people. But I guess when there's Lincoln stuff, everybody comes together. And this was the week commemorating the death of Abraham Lincoln.
The culminating event will actually be in early May. The actual anniversary of the 16th president's death, there was a remembrance ceremony, 12-gun salute. The governor spoke, and as I said, it will continue.
Yeah, I think Lincoln in Illinois, actually for the whole country, but Lincoln in Illinois is like Truman in Missouri. Everybody can get on board with Abraham Lincoln or Harry Truman. But really, we don't talk to you about what everybody's agreeing about. We generally like to talk to you about what people aren't agreeing about. First of all, we're talking about elections, and St. Louis doesn't follow Chicago mayoral elections much, but I think this year everybody was kind of keeping track of Rahm Emanuel and Chuy Garcia. That's big stuff, not only in Chicago, but it must be big stuff in Springfield and the state capitol as well.
It's huge, I think, for a couple of reasons. First of all, it is just Rahm Emanuel. I mean, he was the president's chief of staff. It also has a lot of repercussions, some may think, for the 2016 presidential elections. And what does it mean for Democrats? Chuy was really supported by the quote-unquote progressives, and then the more standard Democrats, or what critics of Rahm Emanuel say is that he's almost more Republican, going to corporate interests. And then, of course, Chicago is nothing without the state of Illinois, and the state of Illinois is nothing without Chicago.
So let's talk about the state budget. The governor has this turnaround budget. I'm not sure if he's turning this ship the way he had hoped to. Are we at a point where you can talk about just where this is or where it might end up?
Ugh, so far it's mired. It ain't anywhere good, I will say that. You've had Governor Bruce Rauner traveling the state. He was going all over Illinois and speaking with editorial boards, holding events, and passing around, actually I have it right here, the turnaround agenda, where he listed all of the programmatic changes that he wants, government structure changes. He says it's reform. Of course, reform is in the eye of the beholder. His agenda is everything from changing how Illinois funds its pensions and cutting back on pensions. It's an overhaul of workers' compensation, really more what he says would be business-friendly reforms, changing unemployment and uninsurance. It's huge. And you hear really optimism from Governor Bruce Rauner that he believes this is going to happen. But where is he going to get the support?
Because we sort of have, I think other people have said this, a Wisconsin governor in a state with a Democratic supermajority, which is an interesting situation. This right to work idea of going municipality to municipality with the right to work. What's the status of that? There seems to be questions about whether that's even constitutional.
The Attorney General says, no, it isn't constitutional. So nonetheless, communities have begun adopting or rejecting, in many cases, this turnaround agenda that has been put forth. Rauner is pressing ahead with it and kind of ignoring what the Democratic Attorney General says is, no, you can't go this route. States have to be either all right to work or not at all.
So much more to come, not only this year, but I think in the years to come.
Oh, yeah.
Amanda Vinicky, State House reporter for Illinois Public Radio. Thanks again for joining us. Always interesting.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jim. And Nick and Jason are back at the table with us, and joining us is Alvin Reed from STL Books, also does some work for STLmag.com. I don't know if Donnie Book would want to claim you here on our show or not.
Sure,
but
we're all part of the Channel 9 PBS family.
Okay, good. Let's pick up where we just kind of left off a little bit with the stadium, and let's just kind of, we've had a little bit of news on that this week. We've got well, I guess maybe back up for just 1 second. But basically, help me out here. 4 cities and 3 teams in play. Somebody, if not 2 towns, are going to get left out when it comes to the NFL. This week, there's a plan to put 2 teams in 1 stadium in LA. There's a plan to take the Rams to LA. A little movement on both of those. And then also, we learned today that the St. Louis task force will be going to New York next week to present to the NFL our plan. Is that pretty well up to speed?
Yeah, I think so. That was a good summation, Casey. Congratulations.
That's where we're at.
Okay, great. So the next topic I'd like to discuss is So
I think there's some minor dramas.
and probably more to come. Fair?
It changes by the hour.
Yes.
What are you hearing? Your ears are to the ground. Are we having NFL in this town or not?
Well, I can't rule out that a team will be playing in St. Louis in the future. However, I don't think that team will be the St. Louis Rams. I think they are going to at least attempt to move to Los Angeles, because that's why Stan Kroenke is building a $2 billion stadium, and he's not going to rent it out to 2 other teams. I think he wants his team to play in that stadium and be one of the highest valued franchises in the National Football League. I think the premise that you continue on in this scorched earth to build this stadium, which now includes possibly trying to not have a vote by the people of St. Louis on how to use the continuation of the bonds, until the National Football League promised me, and I'm not talking about a verbal promise, I mean an on-paper, ironclad promise that if you build the stadium, you will have a football team within, 4 years or something like that. I don't pursue it.
But that's not how negotiation works. It seems like they have the leverage. Is that fair? I mean, they get to call the shots.
Yeah, the whole vote thing is really perplexing, because they do have seen this like bipartisan drumbeat that there should be some sort of votes either on a state legislative level or through a popular vote. And frankly, I think if there was a vote in the city of St. Louis, there's a decent chance it would pass, given if it was, the campaign was run well and people were convinced enough. But as Alvin mentioned, there does seem to be this kind of rush to not have any sort of vote on this bond extension, even though it's going to cost, a lot of money, essentially.
And I think, but they're doing that for a reason. They're doing it because they're wanting to show the NFL that they are so far ahead in this, that they have this financing there. But I think in the long run, it could be very detrimental to the entire process, because people are going to look at this and say, when we approved the Jones Dome, we didn't say, we meant that you could build another stadium too when this one isn't up to your liking. And that's going to be a problem, because I think if they had gone through the normal channels, you would get people on board in the long term. But they're playing their own game with the NFL, because they're trying to say, hey, we're so much further ahead than the people in LA or the people wherever else, and that's what's happening.
And especially when there's a specific ordinance that requires a vote for stadium funding, and St. Louis County Executive Steve Stenger pretty much said even if it wasn't required under this circumstance, there should be a vote anyways. And I'm wondering why Mayor Francis Slay hasn't adopted that same mentality. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, he's not done it, and I think he's going to. I mean, people are going to start saying, "What is your position on this?" I mean, they had come out with a statement about getting sued, and it was very carefully worded about, "We will vigorously defend this lawsuit," but it didn't necessarily say.
And in the same vein, they said, if the judge strikes it down, we'll obey that law too.
Right.
Just like newly elected alderman kind of said here, he wants to follow the law, and that's kind of what the mayor's office has said.
Right.
True. And what is the city, bringing to this project other than support for the project? I think that's basically all they've got right now.
Well, they say, I think they have to have the land in place, they have to have a design in place, and they have to have financing in place.
But I mean, that's the group that wants to build the stadium. But as far as Mayor Slay being able to come out and say, like, we're going to do this for you or we're going to do that for you, like you said, that has not happened.
And this is where it comes. The politicians are elected by the people who they serve. They're not elected by the St. Louis Rams. They're not elected by Stan Kroenke. They're not elected by Roger Goodell. I mean, so some people are going to say, while we want to have an NFL team, we want you to be looking out for our interests, and that may include us saying if we want this or not.
And they also may think they're looking out for our interest in that there is not enough time to vote. Is that?
Well, that was the argument that Jeff Rainford told me, and I'm sure David Hunt of the Post-Dispatch, right before he got sued. And Jeff Rainford is the former chief of staff for Mayor Slay, who's now working as a consultant on the stadium project. And I think I remember reading in, I think, your paper that he was like surprised by this lawsuit between the Sports Authority and the city, and it's let's just say it's an interesting situation.
Because it was so surprising that everyone knew the Rams lease was coming up. That's been on the forefront for a long time. It's not like all of a sudden I was, oh my God, what are we going to do? We don't have a lease.
But I got to just ask, I'm not from St. Louis originally. I'm from suburban Chicago. But is professional football so ingrained in the city's culture that people would be as upset about the Rams leaving as to say if the Cardinals
Is it ingrained in our culture, or do we want to be able to have this badge of honor around the country?
It's that, and also we would have lost 2 football teams in the grand scheme of things, a relatively short period of time. Since 1987, this would be the second team that we had lost. Now, never mind, we skyjacked team from Los Angeles.
And I'm
brought
sure
them
people
here.
are afraid that, you know, the events of Ferguson to a lot of people are a break in the right direction, and it's been very positive events. Others would say it's been negative press, and I'm sure they're worried that the headlines will read negative. First Ferguson, now Rams. We've seen our city in other newspapers already.
Go ahead,
It does
Nick.
get at the St. Louis's inferiority complex. They're always worried about those types of things, like, oh, we've lost that, then we've lost that, and there's always trying to, you know, chase Chicago, and this whole idea that St. Louis was once a larger city than Chicago, and we've been going after that so long. But maybe sometimes people should sit back and think, you know, we may not be a quote NFL city. Neither is Los Angeles, and they've done all right. And, you know, Portland is not one. Austin, Texas is not one. Some of these places have become real hotbeds of innovation and of change, and having young people want to live there. They're going to Austin, Texas. They don't care if they have an NFL team.
Should we
or
dump
not.
the Rams before they dump us and make it our idea?
Well, I think it's too late for that.
But sometimes it's about priorities. St. Louis is not as big of a city as New York City. You know, it's what you do with your money and your time.
Well,
in St. Louis,
it would be a slightly different situation. I think a lot of teams relocate because the cities will just absolutely not be involved in building the stadium. And this could be a situation where, you know, I don't know how this vote situation is going to go, but you could have a situation where the public side is on board and the owner leaves anyways because he wants to go to Los Angeles, and maybe the NFL looks favorably upon it and maybe tries to do like an expansion team like they did in Houston.
We might have a team
or something like that.
We might even, there's some thought we might have the Rams with a different owner. That's probably the longest shot of all.
Any of this, I think, is possible. But the biggest problem that St. Louis has is the fact that Stan Kroenke is building a $2 billion stadium and entertainment complex, and he has not asked for anything.
Yeah.
Which is what a lot of people bring up.
And
If you can
frankly,
afford to build it there.
And frankly, you know, I haven't heard, I mean, a lot of people complain all the time about public subsidies for stadium, and now you have an owner who is basically paying for this entire thing himself, is taking all the risk, and I guess it's obviously being vilified here because they're taking the city, but taking the team away from the city. But I mean, it's a pretty different move than usual.
And the most powerful owners in the National Football League, be they, you know, Robert Kraft, Jerry Jones, that crew, they are not going to tell this man he cannot move that team to Los Angeles because it doesn't work that way. You know, we are not ham and egg in it. We are multi-billion-dollar owners, and Jerry built most of his stadium, and they're not going to tell him he can't move. Now, that doesn't mean some of the other owners might stand up
because
to
they
him.
like using LA as a blackmail device to build their other stadiums.
Right.
So you could see new stadiums in all these cities except LA.
Right. Well, here's the thing. If the National Football League told Stan Kroenke he had to stay in St. Louis, he's not giving $250 million toward that new stadium. He's going to play in the Edward Jones Dome. So like, okay, well, if I have to stay here, I can stay here for free and pay $25,000 a game, some ridiculously low amount of money. He's going to do that. He's not going to.
Yeah.
And, oh, by the way, in that loan they talk about, that other $150 million, it's a loan to him. He'd have to pay it back. So he's $400 million into a stadium, which, when the arbitrators, you know, decided a few years back, he didn't have to pay a dime. Wow. So all of a sudden, out of the goodness of his heart, he's going to be this philanthropic owner and take care of St. Louis. That's not happening.
He can afford it.
He could. But
Okay, I want to keep more. I want to get more of your thoughts on two other topics, NGA and North Side. But I want to get everyone back at the table to join us in that conversation and to join. Stay tuned. Hashtag Stay Tuned STL before we do that as well. Okay, NGA, then I have to every time look at it, National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. Speaking of losing things, are we losing the NGA, and should we care? Why is that so important?
St. Louis very well could lose it. Right now, they're looking at 4 different sites. 3 of them are in Missouri, 1 of them's in Illinois. The one that's gotten most of the attention is in area north St. Louis. It's actually just north of downtown. Illinois, Scott Air Force Base is making a very big pitch to have it there. They've actually even offered free land near Scott Air Force Base.
Because if people don't know, you could, for those of us who don't even know exactly what they do, we know enough that it could kind of go along with Air Force operations.
Yeah, basically they're a spy agency. They do a lot of mapping and map support. They helped track and find bin Laden for the Department of Defense. It's a high-profile agency. It's a big deal, and they pay well. Average salary there is over $70,000 a year, and the city is making an argument. I'm not sure it's always a good political argument to make that, well, we need to keep that earnings tax within the city, but that's one of the arguments that they're making. They're saying that that will help fund services in the city.
We just voted on that earnings tax a couple of years ago, and the line was we might have to get. We've been given a warning. We need.
I do want to ask the St. Louis city policymakers. I know they have a vested interest in keeping it here, but I know that from time to time there have been threats to close Scott Air Force Base. I'm sure that threat is dissipated. But it seems like placing that there would probably keep it open for the foreseeable future and keep an economically viable thing that a lot of St. Louis City people work at. So would it be the worst thing if it was in Illinois for you guys?
If we're regionally thinking, what does it matter?
Yes, it would be the worst thing. I mean, it's really a travesty. It's a huge injustice that the city of St. Louis has to compete for these jobs and give them away. The fact is the federal government has been moving federal jobs into downtown Kansas City on the other side of the state. The federal government made enormous mistakes around the Pruitt-Igoe site, disappeared, never took care of them, never remediated them. This is at least a chance to somewhat fix a problem they created 50 years ago. It would be, I've almost never been as frustrated with my representatives at the federal level as I am with this situation. Those jobs have been in St. Louis for 60 years, and they should stay here.
Pruitt-Igoe, the housing complex that was
supposed to solve. It's near where the new NGA facility.
It was torn down, and there's a large swath of empty land that's been sitting.
It's not just the fact that it was torn down; it's the fact that it was built by the federal government. A neighborhood was cleared, it was mismanaged, it was then torn down, and in the interim, it sort of destroyed the neighborhoods around it. So, I mean, that is a sort of a real and cultural wound perpetrated against the city by the federal government, and they should step up and fix it.
Of course, there are people who are worried now that they're going to lose their homes to put this facility there.
Yeah, and I voted against the bill because I wasn't happy that we might utilize eminent domain
to expand that site.
Well, before we even knew, I mean, I would have held my nose and voted for it if I knew we were certainly landing that facility. But the idea that we would, ahead of time, force people out and not even know if the facility is going to locate there, to me was not, it wasn't something we needed to do. And I think since then, there have actually been a different approach from our development agency to make option offers with people. So if it turns out the facility doesn't move there, they don't actually have to leave their homes.
Staying on that side of town for a project that, at least it's been billed, that it could have ramifications beyond the city. North Side regeneration, what's the latest on that? I'll start with the reporters at the table.
Well, I mean, there's a lot going on, and not much of it is good. There was the revelation that Paul McKee hasn't paid property taxes on a number of parcels of land there. There was a lawsuit that's going about loans. It's
properties may enter, a portion of the properties may enter receivership.
And
I mean, it does not look good, but it hasn't looked good for a long time. I think a lot of people are getting tired of hearing about this project because it's been in the news for years and years and years. And I think now, with these recent problems of not paying the taxes and not doing these things, people are starting to say, you know what, are you building it or not? Or is this going to happen or not? And I think people are getting really tired of it.
Because there were thresholds like in the recent past, when they passed, for example, the Board of Aldermen passed the TIF situation, that there was some expectation that there was going to be action and activity there. And there has been, I think, a push to build a small hospital in that footprint, but other than that, not much has really materialized.
The reason why they're doing that is to lure the geospatial agency there, because they need to have within certain access to medical facilities.
It just, It's very disrespectful to the city because, for the mayor, to some civic leaders, both on north side and south side, elected officials who have stood behind him, for him to not pay his personal property tax, in the city of St. Louis, that's totally disrespectful. And that's separate from the loan problem or what is the cash flow and all that. But like I say, it's nothing but bad news. And at the same time, it's almost as if Mr. McKee has decided, I'm not going to do anything if it costs me a dime. Like this whole thing.
Sorry, are we talking about Northside or the stadium project?
Close. But it took me back. Oh, and by the way, I think for those at City Hall to say they had no idea that he hadn't paid his property taxes, I have a tough time believing that.
We just have a couple of minutes left, but I'm curious, did it rub you? How did you react to the Atlanta newspaper comparing and contrasting St. Louis and Chicago and asking its readers, do we want to succeed or do we want to fail like St. Louis? And I'll open up to anybody here on the table.
Atlanta, who just had a number of teachers sentenced to, go to jail and whatever for cheating on the test, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution also had some districts from around Missouri and whatnot and said they were doing the exact same thing, which was just a travesty of journalism. And you see what the outcome has been in Atlanta as to what was going on. So I put absolutely zero credence in anything AJC has to say about St. Louis.
The only thing I have a problem with, I think St. Louis should be challenged because we have a lot of problems, but Chicago is much larger than St. Louis, and maybe you will go back to the historical past or whatever, but I don't think it's a fair comparison.
Right. Do we need the NFL to stop getting headlines like that?
Do we need the NFL to stop getting headlines like that? Well, I have to be honest, I don't really follow the NFL.
So same question to you.
Things like that don't bother me. I think it can only be to our benefit to look at other cities and look at what they're doing, look at other regions, and pick what works. When another region does that, it's hard for me to really criticize them when they're trying to figure out how can we, what are the things we can do to succeed. I think we have taken a look at some other regions, and you can compare and contrast the things within our region, just that, and many of them are in St. Louis County, but and have been highlighted recently. I would love to see us make some moves to make us more like regions that have more cohesive policy.
Okay, we'll leave it there, but just for a second to give us enough time to switch over to staytuned.9net.org. We'll continue the conversation there until next time, Phil, on the air. Stay tuned. You said you're from Chicago. Sorry, pardon me while I take this off. It's really sweaty in here. Your thoughts when you saw the newspaper? If you saw it,
I did see that article, and
to be honest, I saw it on Facebook, and then you had to pay for it, so I didn't read the whole article.
Comparing
I got the
Chicago and St. Louis, they're two very, very different cities of different scales. Scott's exactly right. For Atlanta to be looking outward at other cities and what they're doing makes a lot of sense. I also think that was not a completely fair analysis of St. Louis that Atlanta did. Look, we've had some challenges as of late, the last 6 to 8 months especially, but you want to say St. Louis is not a better place now than it was 20 years ago? We've come a long way, and we still have a lot more work to do.
I don't know, though. I think it does at least show some of the challenges. It at least shows that St. Louis has a PR problem, that people are looking, what's the worst possible city we can compare at what we want to be to, and they pick St. Louis. That's a serious problem. And I don't know if, I think politicians like to say, we're so much better than we were 20 years ago, but if you look 20 years ago, we've lost a lot of corporations in the last 20 years. We've lost Anheuser-Busch. We've lost Ralston Purina. We've lost A.G. Edwards. All these things are gone. These big corporations that used to be here, they're not here anymore. I'm not sure, crime seems to remain the same. I'm not exactly sure St. Louis is this great garden spot compared to what it was.
And I moved back 20 years ago, and I will tell you that one of the first things I noticed was when the bad news hit, i.e. American Airlines, and they bought TWA, and the line coming out of downtown RCGA is like, this is the best thing that could happen because now this is going to happen. And we always do this. And we say, I'm not saying you have to jump worst case scenario, but there isn't a lot of progressive thinking. Now, hopefully these younger people who have been elected can help us possibly, do a little bit more than that. But you're absolutely right. As far as just look who left. And we always say, it was because of this, or it was because of that. Well, don't make it the excuse. Let's try to figure out why. And if I could snap my fingers and do one thing that would change this, I lived in Washington, D.C. for 4 years. These other places have large mass transit systems, and if I could snap my fingers and bring D.C. system to St. Louis, I think that would help solve so many of our problems.
So I think what he touches on is the least productive thing you can do is worry about a PR problem. You should worry about doing the actual improvements. Like we spend a lot of time, I've seen this, we fight about whether the crime statistics are fair between us and other regions. Right. Let's just worry about the fact that crime is too high and try to fix it, and then the statistics will take care of themselves. You know, we sort of dither on mass transit. We were a leader 20 years ago on mass transit. We're not now. Other regions have passed us by very quickly and continue to move ahead. We shouldn't rest on the laurels of what we did 20 years ago. We should be working now to make these improvements that position us for the future.
Follow up. Okay, it was decided by somebody somewhere that we had to have a new stadium. Look how quickly this has progressed to where, you know, maybe it's viable, who knows, but people made up their minds, we have to have this stadium. Well, why don't we do that with Metro? And, you know, why don't we just say, like, listen, we are going to decide some things for you, community, and this is one of them. Because that's what Washington did. People had the same complaints. Oh, I don't want the Metro coming to my neighborhood, blah, there goes my TV and all that mess. All right, but they did it, and now it's a wonderful thing. So if we're going to make decisions like that, how about not limiting them to, you know, a few hundred acres downtown? How about it involves the entire region?
Probably because that's what most people are concerned about.
Well, you know, sometimes you have to say, like, hey, trust us. And I know that sounds crazy, but yeah.
Federal government probably paid for most of the Metrolink up front.
Nope, not the last one.
Not the last one.
The initial, I'm talking like 1995.
Sure, the federal government, not most. Federal government will pay at most about half of mass transit projects.
Most of it's through a sales tax, which I think isn't that pretty unusual?
We are unusual because Missouri does nothing to support mass transit.
We get more from Illinois, even though we get more riders on this side of the
Metro. Yes, Metro gets dramatically more money from Illinois than from Missouri. And I think Alvin touches on this too. A stadium is so important that the governor will do a press conference downtown to talk about it. I would love a press conference about how we have 100 soccer fields that are in great shape for kids to play on, and we have 50 baseball fields in the city that are in great shape for kids to play on. How we're going to execute and have a Metrolink expansion in the next 8 years. Those things would pay off much more, honestly, than a stadium would. And there's, you look to Jefferson City, and you just get crickets on these things that I think are very important to St. Louis residents.
And I think that does showcase one problem in St. Louis is you have a sort of outstate Missouri sentimentality placed particularly on transportation, and so MoDOT will put this sort of suburban or even predominantly rural view on the urban street grid, and it just makes absolutely no sense, some of the things that they do. And that is something that a lot of elected leaders should be fighting for, and something the governor could be a lot more involved in, instead of just always being here for the stadium and nothing else.
Yeah.
Maybe it goes back a little full circle to you guys getting elected. If you're elected, maybe does that mean that this is what people south of Cherokee, Jefferson, however the boundaries were that I can't remember, Chippewa, is that what are the things we're talking about here, what your folks are talking about?
Absolutely. The Metrolink was a key part of my campaign. Folks south of Cherokee and the south side want to see an adequate form of public transportation serving our neighborhoods, but it also connects the north side too. I mean, it's an issue of social justice that I think progressive folks in the city of St. Louis really want to see. Any top-notch city in the United States, in the world in fact, has a high-quality public transportation system, and we are simply lacking it here in the city. And what's even more egregious is that we passed Proposition A out in St. Louis County, I don't know, 4 years ago, and we've been collecting sales tax in the region for the particular expansion of the north-south line. And I think it just is going to take some of us to be really pushing for it and making sure that our regional leaders are getting behind it.
But you can't just snap your fingers like Alvin said. It takes money.
That's true. Well, and I understand that, but like I say, it seems like we find money for things what we want to find money for. And this is one where we need to find some money to get this expanded, the north-south. And I've said this before too, but if you wanted to create some lines that paid for themselves, as much talk as you hear that people don't want it. If you ran a line or a train on existing tracks from west, to east, people would pay to use it. That would be one of the first things that just paid for itself because commuters in the morning would take it. And why hasn't it taken us this long to even figure that out? Because that's the first thing other places did.
The stadium is what, $1 billion project? Yeah. The North-South Metrolink is what, $1.5 billion? I mean, and we've already got almost $500 million with this Prop A money. I mean, we're getting on that with the with the 10-year span of it. So I mean, it's really not that big of a project.
Yeah, and one of the other things is St. Louis County's involvement. And from talking with St. Louis County Executive Steve Stanger, I think he is. I don't want to say he's gung-ho about a North-South Metrolink, but I think he's probably willing to be a partner in that because even if it's, I would assume a North-South Metrolink would go into St. Louis County as well.
It absolutely does.
So I mean,
Westport, right?
I think he's pretty receptive about the idea, and if you get a partner like St. Louis County, which has a lot of revenue there, then maybe you can actually get that happening. So.
He doesn't want the city to be part of the county. He doesn't want the county to pay for any part of the
He hasn't
stadium.
said that. He's just not a big Better Together fanatic, basically.
He said it's off the table, has he not? It's
pretty much, yeah.
But he basically has said, and this is pretty consistent, that he wants to study the situation himself. He's not like a couple of the Republican candidates for county executive who are gung-ho against it, but I mean, he has flat out said it's not a priority right now, especially post-Ferguson, and I think that pretty much takes it off the table for now.
He threatened to sue if they didn't take his name off of the letterhead. Well, I think that's pretty...
Well, being against Better Together is different than being against the idea of a city-county merger, because we don't know exactly what Better Together, their ultimate end goal is, because their merger, quote-unquote, could be a lot different than the city just re-entering the county. It could be a mega merger, or as I like to call it, the Tony Messenger plan.
Yeah, well,
did I cut you off?
Back to something that Alvin said earlier, when we have projects we want to do, we generally can find the money for them somewhere. In this town, it seems we often think it's one or the other. It's a stadium or Metrolink. Why can't we figure out a way to do both? Why can't we start looking at plans for revitalizing the riverfront, building a stadium, and also expanding rapid transit and moving people more north-south in this town? I think we got to start thinking bigger and figure out a way to do both.
Yeah, you mentioned, we were talking about East St. Louis earlier, and I've always had this, I call it the Reed plan. I said, boy, I tell you, East St. Louis could be fixed because it's not that big, and you don't have that many people there anymore. Now that would be one. If I really, really had a lot of money and maybe lived in Illinois or someplace else, I would look at literally buying East St. Louis. I mean, because you can start. I mean,
put your football stadium there.
If Cincinnati, when I was an intern there in 1981, Covington and Newport were like our Metro East Side. Go back now. It's a show place. Everybody wants to live over there and look back at the stadium and all that in Cincinnati.
Well, I asked Illinois Governor Bruce Rauner about building the stadium in Illinois, and he was receptive about it. Some people were like, that's a stupid question to ask because it's never going to happen. It may never happen. It probably won't, but in that instance, first of all, you'd be revitalizing a part of the Metro East, and if you could get both states to pay for it, maybe the cost will go down, with the bonds. But again, I'm not holding my breath on that one, but it's maybe an out-of-the-box idea that no one has thought of.
I think Alvin was saying he wants to be the Paul McKee of East St. Louis.
Yeah.
I would actually have to have some money.
It's good. Money doesn't fix everything.
But also sort of recenter the energy of the St. Louis greater region. So,
Right.
I mean, you start putting people on the east side. And
there was an effort many years ago to put the airport in
in Columbia Waterloo.
And then that all failed because the St. Louis County people said, oh my God, how could you possibly put it in Illinois? And every time we've talked about that, that's what happened. And the airport, I think you could look back and probably the region would be a lot better off because it would be a lot more centralized if we had done something like that.
Right.
Because we have people in Missouri who pretend that Illinois doesn't exist. And even though East St. Louis is a closer neighbor to the city of St. Louis than half these other places that we talk about and worry about so much. And that's why people keep moving further and further and further out west. And St. Louis is going in the city. To them, that's an afterthought. They almost look down upon the city. And that's not something that happens in Illinois.
You got to, one of the reasons why Kansas City proper might be thriving is because, the Kansas side is thriving too.
Okay, now you've officially left the region. That's my sign to wrap it up.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. I appreciate your time.